This is an exciting time in Scotland's story, and understanding our past will help us determine our future. And when Scotland's voice is heard, it charts the way forward. This is Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond.
Hello and welcome to the third of 4 festive editions of Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond, and we hope you've had a lovely Christmas. In today's edition, we take a look at some of the most popular themes in our show since its launch last summer. It seems extraordinary, but we are now already on the 25th edition of the programme. Well, we got off to a brisk start, not on dry land, but in fact 12 nautical miles offshore Aberdeen in the Kincardine field, where Alex introduced a discussion on Scotland's offshore bounty. It marked out early that energy and the Scottish economy would be a key aspect of our shows.
And today, our very first show, we're looking at the future. And the future is here, 12 nautical miles off Aberdeen on 70 metres of water. The Kincardine floating offshore wind farm. In terms of being grid connected, it's the biggest in the world. And it is the future of energy, not just for Scotland, but the world over. Alan McCaskill of Flotation Energy. I said this was the world's largest floating wind farm. It's really a demonstrator at this stage. So Kincardine's demonstrating exactly what?
Demonstrating the floating technology. All the wind farms that we've built so far virtually are on fixed structures. This one floats on, as you can see, 3 buoyancy chambers. And
what's the big advantage of having a giant wind turbine that can actually move? What's the advantage in that?
Well, fundamentally, by floating, we can now access 2/3 of the world's space in the coastal areas, which is too deep for fixed structures.
So we're in 70 metres of water,
Yeah.
and we're only 12 nautical miles off Aberdeen. So that's quite deep. So you're saying you couldn't actually build a fixed structure at 70 metres?
You might just be able to make a fixed structure going in 70 metres nowadays. Technology has improved. But we're now talking about taking these structures to much, much deeper depths. We're looking at 120 metres in our
120 metres of water?
120 metres in our 2 sites in the UK. The United States has just licensed a series of sites off California. They're in 1,000 metres.
And so therefore, I mean, there's an environmental advantage, isn't there? Because, people are much more comfortable with the idea that you've got a structure of that scale and size, but of course you can tow away.
Well, if you have to. Let's try to avoid that.
But one of these is going to Rotterdam, isn't it?
Yes, for repair. But we will not be doing that again if we can. We will learn how to do that here at site, and that's one of the things that we're working on at the moment.
Because one of the arguments against wind energy has been, well, what happens when the structures are old and rotten and overtaken? Well, people actually take them away, but because if it's a floating turbine, then there's no doubt about that.
It's easy enough to take them away, 35 years' time maybe, when these machines have reached the end of their lives. But the infrastructure that exists on the seabed, things like the cables and all of that, has a much longer life, so we can replant the wind farm with newer and better machines and run it for another 35 years.
And how big are these things going to go? I mean, how big's that one?
That machine is 191 metres above sea level at the tip of the blade. The substructure weighs probably about 3,500 tonnes, and the machine itself weighs about 1,000 tonnes plus.
One of the guys was telling me that 1 tonne of this machine can power a house for a year. Is that true, or was he just pulling my leg?
Might take a few turns, but fundamentally, yes, these machines are 9.5 megawatt machines, so they generate 9.5 times 24 megawatts. That's a lot more than you need for one house. I think typically a few 1,000 houses are what a wind farm like this can. But I just don't know the answer to that.
But if we get enough, can we power Scotland? Can
Yes,
we power
can
Europe?
We're probably close to being able to power Scotland. It's the largest source of electricity in generation in Scotland now is wind, and the whole of Europe can be powered by it, along with solar and other forms of renewable energy, because they're complementary. You know, the wind doesn't blow all the time, the sun doesn't shine all the time, but if you've got both, you've got a balance. And then with batteries and other technologies, you can overall store the electricity and you can supply a renewable world.
And I suppose one of the other advantages of being deep offshore with floating turbines is that the wind blows more of the time.
And wind blows more of the time. The further offshore you go, the less people can see them, so we don't get upset because we're destroying the coastal views. And the resource is larger and there's more space.
Now you're a pioneer of offshore wind technology. You've been involved for 20 years, since the Beatrice project all these years ago. Yeah. But you were originally an oil and gas man.
Yeah.
So did you have a kind of Damascus moment when you saw the light and said the future is wind?
I say I'm a reformed oil man. But reality was that I worked for an oil company and we had a power problem, and we came to a solution, which was that if we built some wind turbines, we'd have more power, and that was what we wanted. So that's why we pioneered, and at the time we built those Beatrice machines you're talking about, those were the biggest machines in the world. They were in the first to go on jacket structures, they were in the deepest waters, and they were the first ever to be built on the continental shelf. And that probably, in fact, honestly, was because we brought the knowledge and the skills and the ability that the oil and gas business has, which, although I worked in it and I don't any longer, I'm very proud of my time and career in the wind business, in the oil business, and now in the wind business.
And of course, one of the first tasks of these offshore turbines will be to actually power the oil and gas platforms. That's
Exactly.
one of the jobs they could do.
And that's what exactly we are doing. Our Green Volt project is designed to power the Buzzard field and a series of fields in the outer Murray Firth, and our Senos project is designed to power the fields in the central North Sea, which means we can't prevent that takes out all of the hydrocarbons and the carbon dioxide that would normally be created if you were powering and driving those things using gas. So you sell the gas and use it more efficiently, and then you use green power to drive the oil fields.
Now, how about economic benefits? I mean, Flotation Energy is a Scottish company, but there's relatively little Scottish participation in this vast offshore resource, offshore Scotland.
Yeah, we were 5 people when we founded this company in the middle of 18. I think we're at the end of this month we'll be 100. Last year we were taken over by TEPCO, and so although we're a Scottish company and we work globally, our parent is Japan's biggest utility. Yes, it's sad that we can't be an independent Scottish company, but we weren't able to raise the capital in Scotland or the United Kingdom. And the capital to build these next generation wind farms, the price tag is a couple of billion at the start, up to even as we get bigger and bigger wind farms to significantly more.
But isn't there a pattern? I mean, if we go back several generations to the great oil and gas resource of Scotland, comparatively little local Scottish participation. There's some exceptions to that, the Wood Group, for example, but comparatively little. Are we going to see the same thing yet again? We're going to have this industrial revolution offshore, but the offshore Scotland, we're going to have very little footprint in it.
Yes, except that it will be largely as you go around the world, as I have been in many places, and you find Scots there working for companies driving the industry that we started to set up here in the 1970s. I joined the oil business in 78, so I've been involved in oil and gas and offshore wind now for nearly 40-something years.
And what would your advice be, let's say to the Scottish government, so as they could make a Scottish industrial footprint in this enormous resource?
Well, that is one. I thought that the process of ScotWind was appalling.
This ScotWind was the auction that took place in 2022, in the early part of 22, where they seemed to auction off bargain basement prices a large section of the Scottish Continental
I think they
Shelf.
got 700 million in late January, and the US auctioned off about a quarter of that capacity in February. They got 4.4 billion.
So as the most experienced offshore wind executive, certainly in Scotland, what do you think it was worth? If it wasn't worth 700 million, what was it worth?
I think you could have got that for a small fraction of the capacity, and
Or maybe every year.
and then you could have run auctions every 2 or 3 years and got that same amount of money every year for the next coming years. Many people in the industry complain about all these auctions, but I have to say, once you've opened Pandora's box and government has discovered that there's a lot of money in it, they're not going to stop doing it. So it is the way of the future, but that's life.
But of course, there's opportunities to come. There's a lot more acreage offshore, and the deeper you go, the more acreage there is. There's licensing, there's the planning conditions, so there's opportunities to revisit that early mistake.
There is some opportunity, but let's see how and when. In the UK context, there was about 2 or 3 years between round 1 and round 2, and maybe a few more years between round 3, and then there was 10 or 12 years before round 4. So it could be a long time before any more acreage is auctioned off.
And I detect a wee bit of frustration here. I mean, with your expertise in the industry, I mean, you know, the Scottish Government consult you at all? Do they phone you up and say, listen, McCaskill, we're looking for some advice on this? I mean, the Crown Estate Commission, you know, spend most of their time previously running expensive buildings in London and forests and foreshores. I mean, did they phone you up and say, McCaskill, what should we do?
We weren't involved, but the interesting point is this, that not just us, but there's about 4 or 5 companies in the world who have knowledge and expertise in how to do floating. Not one of them won a site in Scotland. And I don't know what their criteria was based in, but it certainly wasn't based on the issues of knowledge and capability, when us, Equinor, RWE and others did not win sites, ocean winds. All of us have built these things, and only those who didn't build them were allowed to win sites.
Welcome back. Now, of course, Scottish independence and how to get there is the underlying theme of our show. In many episodes, we've examined the legal basis for Scotland's independence campaign and the political imperatives for its success. How does a legal opinion translate into practical campaigning, and indeed how does it impact on independence strategy? Well, to discuss this, Alex is joined in the crossfire section of our show by Ruth Wishart, journalist and commentator, and also by a very much in the news MP, the MP for Nehelan and Year, SNP rebel Angus Brendan McNeill.
So Ruth and Angus, welcome to Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond.
Thank
Hi
you.
there.
Can I turn to you first, Ruth? You know, this opinion from Robert McCorquodale, very learned, very useful, I think, for the national movement. But how much political, practical effect does it have having a legal opinion such as this?
Well, I think it's very useful that somebody of his stature would have pointed the finger at the Supreme Court and suggested that they got it wrong in their judgment. I mean, that's always good to hear. But in terms of a practical effect, I can't see it's going to make one blind bit of difference. I mean, the one thing I've learned over the years is that if you keep begging for a Section 30 order on bended knee, all you get is very sore knees.
Angus MacNeil, what about your opinion of the McCorquodale opinion?
I mean, I think the practical effect depends on how it's deployed. And, that then goes into the realms of political argument. And I think it's good to have up your sleeve. It's a very useful thing. And as Ruth said, it shows that the Supreme Court of the UK isn't divinely ordained. It's a collection of people, yes, very learned. But over and above that, I think probably as Ruth ultimately says, it depends if argument falls in and around where the Supreme Court is. And I would say, the Supreme Court said what it said, but it also said something very interesting in its own judgment in paragraph 81. And it's on there that I see more argument and more debate than the one refuting it, because I think actually the Supreme Court provided its own route to show where Scotland can go.
Well, you've got us all hanging on here with bated breath, Angus. Tell us what paragraph 81 said. Are people at demonstrations going to be shouting paragraph 81?
Hopefully they will. If they all read paragraph 81, then they might well be. Paragraph 81 basically said why the Supreme Court couldn't allow the devolved Parliament to hold a referendum. It wasn't so much the referendum, it was the consequences of that referendum, in that the referendum could bring about changes related to the United Kingdom Parliament. And therefore, with those powers retained at Westminster, you couldn't actually you couldn't be given the powers to hold that referendum, although they said it would have no immediate legal consequences. And even if the UK government had not given any political commitment to act upon it, they pointed out that it would have an authority in any culture and political culture founded upon democracy. So ultimately, going back to McCorquodale, going back to the Supreme Court, paragraph 81 ultimately shows what rules here, and what rules here is democracy. And ultimately, if the people vote for something, the people will get it. Now, we can scare them and tell them, you can't because it's not legal and whatever. Law will follow democracy. Democracy is the king here.
And do you agree with that, Ruth? Democracy is king?
Yeah, I absolutely do. And I think, further than that democracy delayed is democracy denied, to misquote an old saw. But, I'm not at all sure why we're bothered that much about the Supreme Court. I'm getting fed up with them, going with a begging bowl to folk like the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, as far as I'm concerned, is nothing more or less than a kind of pinnacle of the legal establishment for them down there. I don't see what particular relevance it has for Scotland. I want Scotland to get up off its knees and get on with it, frankly.
But in defence of the Supreme Court, which puts me in an unusual position, it was actually the Scottish government who went to ask their opinion.
Yes, I know, and I regret that, because I think we've done that once before and got given our jotters pretty smartly. So I don't think there was any chance that the Supreme Court was going to look kindly on anything coming from the Scottish government, or indeed anybody else whose future aspiration is independence for Scotland. It's just that I've got a strong feeling that poll after poll after poll tells us that the majority of Scots are still in favour of independence. Now, that goes across all parties. I'm not making a plea for any one particular party. I think there is a groundswell of fairly solid opinion in favour of independence in Scotland, and we've really got to take that, flood. We've got to take that tide at the flood. We've got to get on with it when we've still got that rather large group of people who are still in favour of independence. And I'm really in favour of everybody of an independent mind in Scotland getting together and pursuing that shared aim.
With the independence strategic vision in a state of some confusion, help may be at hand from leading thinker Robin McAlpine, who in the last few days has published a new strategy for independence. Robin, welcome to Scotland Speaks again with Alex Salmond.
Hi.
Now, Robin McAlpine, one of your criticisms of the current approach to independence is you think the SNP government and other independent supporters have got themselves bogged down in process without thinking of the objective and the ideal and the conversion that's required. But isn't that just because they're not very good at process? Is that not why they're bogged down in it?
Well, yes, but we are trying to skip to the end. That's the problem. We're trying to skip to the bit where we force the ability of everybody to see that we have a settled will. So that's the purpose of a referendum. The purpose of a referendum is to force everybody to see that we have the settled will of Scotland for an outcome of independence. And the problem is we don't yet have the settled will. And the thing that you do to get and win a referendum is different than what you do for the steady building of support among people who are not quite there yet. And I know a lot of people have argued that you can only change minds during a referendum. Therefore, to change the minds, we have to have the referendum. But that's not true. There are other ways to do it, and we've not tried enough of them.
But wouldn't the experience suggest exactly that? I mean, by and large, if you interpret real polls for independence knocked around the 30% mark for a long time in Scottish politics. It was only when battle was joined and the issue was put to the touch and people were confronted with a decision that the campaign accelerated in all its glory in the summer of 2014, and that 30% became 45%, perhaps more at some points.
Yep, that's absolutely right. And what the learning from this is, there's an academic who's looking across the Basque Country, the Catalans, and Scotland to try and learn these lessons. What is it that's causing these upturns? And the outcome, the thing that we've discovered is that it's a political or cultural event gives people a permission to reconsider their position. However, a referendum is only one of those. In fact, it's in the minority. So as you will yourself remember, another one was the discovery of North Sea oil. It was a political event that caused a change in the atmosphere. The Basque peace process did exactly the same thing. And there was a big cultural event in the late 90s, early 2000s in Catalonia that did the same thing. So again, that's cart before horse. If the question is, from where we are now, how do we get enough support? If there was a fast route to a referendum, maybe that would be a good idea. But since we don't have one, let's do something we can actually do, which is start treating no voters with a bit more respect and answer their questions, engage with them, and let's try and bring them towards independence. We haven't been doing that systematically, and that's a mistake.
So last weekend you published a new strategy for independence. Summarise what you were trying to say in that document and how people can see in its full glory where it's going to be available to them.
Well, if you haven't seen it already by social media or in the press, you can certainly go to the Commonweal website, commonweal.scot, and you can download it from there. There's different versions, so there's a long one, a shorter one, and a very short summary. Right, so what I'm really trying to do is pull us back and say, right, let's start conceptually to see how do we actually win independence? Because I think we're kind of forgetting this a little bit. So the first thing that I want to say is we've got lost in this idea that a referendum is a gold standard. This is nonsense. This is not true. The gold standard of becoming an independent country is a recognition agreement with the nation from which you are ceding. So as long as the country from which you are leaving is very happy for you to go, the rest of the international community is going to shrug and say, well, fair enough, that's okay with us. If it's okay with them, it's okay with us. So the recognition agreement for a country like Scotland is the crucial thing. And a referendum is a means of getting to the negotiations for a recognition agreement. But there are other modes. So what I'm saying is, let's remember that first. What we are trying to do is drag the UK government to the negotiating table to negotiate a settlement for Scotland leaving the UK. If we do that, what is it that drags them to the negotiating table? And if someone has found a way to do that without demonstrating the settled will of the people of Scotland to them, I've not seen it. So we have got to get to a point where we can credibly say we have a settled will to pull them to the negotiating table, which means we need to build that public will. And the rest of the paper goes into some depths about how you do that. And then the thing that I've been emphasising as hard as I possibly can is the bit where you trigger the theatre of demonstrating that you have the public settled will, which could be a referendum, it could be a de facto referendum, it could be a number of other things, right? That's at the end. That's what you do once you've got the upper hand. If you try and do that when you don't have the upper hand, you'll fail, because Westminster can just shrug and say, no, you're not put us in a position where we cannot ignore you. So at the moment, they can ignore us because we're not in a strong enough position. Until we get in a stronger position, they can keep ignoring us. So this is what I'm trying to get across. Remember what we're trying to do. Remember how you really do it. Remember, look at what's happened over the last decade. Learn the lessons of what doesn't work, and let's try the thing we've not done, which is solidly building support by taking voters seriously.
Welcome back, and now it's back to festive competition time. Last week, we showed you the second tranche of Alex's 7 hidden heroes. The task for you all is simple. Out of the 14 which you will have seen, you have to select the top 3 which are Alex's favourites in any order, and he's written them here on this card. And every correct answer will receive some much sought after show memorabilia. And what's more, the opportunity to nominate a new hidden hero for Alex to broadcast. So take a look at the last 2 shows to see all 14 hidden heroes in one place, and drop us a note to this address, the show at alexsalmond.scot, with your top 3 and a suggestion for another hero to be featured in a future show. Now, in our last show proper before the holidays, we featured Ash Regan MSP's initiative to break the independence logjam.
Alba, as you know, proposed that at each and every election, political parties supporting independence should stand on an unambiguous mandate to negotiate independence from Westminster. If a majority of votes are achieved for independence, then the Scottish Government should mobilise popular and international pressure to implement that mandate. However, that doesn't prevent additional democratic action now in seeking the view of people in extending the powers of the Scottish Parliament. So I want to ensure that people of Scotland are able to express their view, and that would be via a lawful referendum on the 19th of September 2024 on whether or not the Scottish Parliament should have the powers to negotiate and to legislate for independence for Scotland.
The National Movement of Scotland desperately needs ideas at the present moment to take matters forward. It's clearly not going to be adequate to go into a general election and say what we're doing is campaigning to ask Westminster to give us a referendum. I mean, I think we've been down that road since 2014. So new initiatives and new ideas are needed. and certainly one that puts the initiative back into the hands of the Scottish Parliament. It should be one that everybody welcomes, and the fact that Ash is putting forward the bill should not stop anybody who's interested in Scottish independence signing up to it and being enthusiastically in support of it. Well, if you've got the two things, if you've got a referendum showing that people want the issue of independence to be decided by the Parliament, if you've got a majority in an election saying an instruction by a majority of votes to negotiate independence, then you've got an irresistible double whammy on Westminster. You've got the two things that are necessary, the referendum plus the popular assent. Both the saying that yes, they should have the power to do it, and the people instructing politicians to exercise that power. Very difficult for any government anywhere to resist that sort of democratic imperative. We've always been looking for a way to bend Westminster to the will of the Scottish people. I think Ash Regan may well have unlocked that door.
And this is what you had to say in response to this and other recent shows.
Peem says, another great show and some more of our hidden superheroes. I do hope someone is compiling a volume of our heroes. Thanks to Alex Taz and all the team for bringing us another slick production. Stay safe and keep up the good work. Merry Christmas to Aberdy, Sarah Alba. SN4 says another excellent episode and thanks again. Followed by South Africa, who says first class. We then receive some nominations from Andrew Neil MacLeod for Alex's favourites, Thomas Muir of Hunters Hill, John McLean and James Hogg. Well, I won't give you the answers yet, but for a future hidden hero, Andrew said he'd like to nominate Robert Wishart, Bishop of Glasgow. Perhaps not so hidden, Bishop Wishart has been entirely overlooked in Hollywood treatments of the Wars of Independence, though he would have fitted right in as stalwart Friar Tuck to cinematic versions of William Wallace and Robert the Bruce. A friend and advisor to both men, without Bishop Wishart, Scotland would never have attained her freedom. And finally, Kizzy Wiz says such an interesting programme with Alex. And so see all of us.
Welcome back, and now to our final clips for today of episodes from shows past. Now, we've tried not to dwell too hard on hard politics every single week, but to add a little bit of culture and insight. Two of the most popular programmes feature the artist Gerard Burns and the Scotland superfan and super gran Moira Brown, who, second only perhaps to Steve Clarke, deserves the credit for steering the Scotland team through to the Euro finals in Germany. This is how we told those very important and wonderful stories.
The Saltire has an emotional pull on you, as emotional tug, and when most Scots have got a heart, at least. But what about is there something else about the Saltire and the figures you've depicted with it? I mean, you have a whole range of figures who travelling hopefully with their Saltire, as this family group is, or perhaps young lassies going through woods carrying a Saltire. And A New Journey is one of your paintings that I'm familiar with, became a Christmas card of the First Minister, if I remember right. I mean, is there something about the imagery and the symbolism of the saltire that has more than just the attachment to Scotland?
As an artist, you are constantly looking for the thing from all of the infinite number of possibilities, from all of the infinite number of things that I could be doing as an artist. You're looking for the thing that pops out at you. And everywhere I went in the world, every photograph, when there was a saltire, it literally jumped out at me. So when I decided to start to make, this was the first one, I couldn't believe that other people hadn't done it. To me, it was that obvious. And I suppose the slightly, what could you say, crass or the trite answer to the question is that I think it just looks beautiful. You know, and again, harking back to the Renaissance, they would use fabrics in that way that they would have a piece of cloth, they would have drapes, simply because they were beautiful. And that shape, as I say, it just always, so for me, it was completely an obvious thing to do. Now, I made this, I think when I first spoke to you about this, at the point where I made this, I would have considered myself to be relatively apolitical. So I made this painting because I'm Scottish. The painting in the push towards up to the referendum took on a more overtly political overtone. But to an extent that was imposed upon the work as my own journey politically, from relatively apolitical to pro-independence. This took on quite an overtly political overtone, so much so that still to this day, this has been one of the other pieces with the girl with the saltire has been re-engineered, and there's a guy who put a Union Jack on it because the saltire was so embedded in terms of that push that he was able to reverse engineer it to tell a completely opposite story. So these paintings and this.
So when I was First Minister, and I was doing all these political interviews in front of the Rowan, and you, as you rightly say, were relatively apolitical, at least at the start of that process. Did you ever look at the screen and say, that's that Salmond at it again, using my painting as a prop for his political ambitions?
No, because the painting should have been in the Parliament. That was the perfect place for it. And in fact, so there's a backstory there. The painting was supposed to go to the Parliament and was knocked back.
Yes, they thought it was too Scottish for the Scottish Parliament.
Deemed to be too Scottish. I mean.
Well, luckily the sort of leadership attitude to these things changed when I came in.
Yep.
But nonetheless, it was a tremendous privilege to have your painting in my office. And of course, another friend of the show, the late Doddy Weir, is one of your most remarkable subjects. I mean, the painting of Doddy is just, well, it's just Doddy, that's Absolutely. What it is. What was it like painting such a legendary figure?
So that came about a slightly circuitous route. I'd agreed to paint Doddy as part of a fundraising exercise. They had a big event over in Hong Kong. And I think Doddy's portrait is a good example of what a portrait actually is. Had I painted Doddy 5 years previously, it would have been a completely different painting. And when I went to meet Doddy, I think he was a wee bit nervous. We went out to try and take some photos. He decided he was going to put on the suit. And Doddy, what I learned about Doddy is that to make people feel at ease, he would act a clown. That was what he did. And I had all these goofy shots, these kind of a big daft shapes and his leg up and all that. And eventually I had to say, Doddy, I think this is completely wrong. You're in a really difficult place right now. This has to be quite a serious painting. It needs to have some pathos. And actually the day that we were taking the photographs, it was freezing cold. We were getting to the end of it. And I said, I want you to put your hands in your pockets and stare straight to camera. And he couldn't get his hands in his pockets. Cathy had to come and put his hands in his pockets, so the shine was off it completely. And that last series of images I got of him straight to camera, and you can see the pain across his eyes. Those were the ones without question. And I imposed the background on it. I wanted it to be of the borders. So it's the Eildon Hills which are in the background. And so there's one last I think, beautiful story. I imposed rain clouds, I imposed dark clouds across the back of the portrait because I wanted to say that there's trouble and there are some streaks, black cloud streaks. And Doddy asked me at the portrait gallery, "You've never told me what the 4 bands of light are at the back of the painting." I'm saying, "Which bands of light?" "The 4 bands of light." I said, "Doddy, that's rain clouds." He didn't see the rain clouds. He saw the bands of light. I think as a metaphor for the way that the guy tackled his illness, I just think that's absolutely beautiful.
What a great story, and what a memorable one too. Moira, you should be welcoming me to Hampden Park since you've been here a lot more than I have.
A fair few times.
So what was your first ever game here in the home of Scottish football?
It was the Victory International after the Second World War.
So that was 1946. What do you remember about that game?
Of course, I remember that we won, but I was disappointed it didn't go in an official record.
All right, because it was the Victory International, and there was I looked up the records in this. There was 140,000 people there.
I believe so. All I know that it was a tight crush in the terrace.
And when Jimmy Delaney, the Celtic forward, he scored the winning goal with just a couple of minutes left, was there a big sort of sway and crush in the crowd?
Yes, there was. There were still barriers, but my father protected me as a young 13-year-old, you know.
So your dad took you along to the game, and that gave you the taste for Scotland games, did it?
I kind of had it before, even when I was about 4 years of age, watching football on the park opposite the council house in Coatbridge.
But even though you're from Coatbridge, you became an Airdrie supporter.
Yes, I didn't like Albion Rovers ground at all, and even although it was just over the hill from the house, so since I was nearly in the cusp of Airdrie.
So you're a long-term season ticket holder at Broomfield, but then Scotland became your main love, and apart from I think a 10-year gap when you were doing something else, you've been to just about every game.
Just about. The only time I missed it was for a friendly abroad was for my daughter's 50th birthday, and I spent that in Berlin. So I got to Graz after to shed a few tears.
Now, you've had you've been virtually everywhere with the team. You've been to South America, you've been to Uzbekistan, you've been to the 1974 World Cup in Germany, but you've had 1 or 2 mishaps. A friendly game in Sweden that put you in hospital.
Well, it was prior to the game, so I actually missed that game and was in tears. I fell and slipped at 2:30 in the morning on a ferry, and it ended up in the University Hospital in Gothenburg with a triple fracture on my right.
So let's get this right, Moira. You slipped before the game at 2:30 in the morning. What were you doing at 2:30 in the morning which caused the slip up?
Well, I was drinking, having a little libation, and then dancing with one of the younger Tartan Army followers.
So here I am at Leicester Hampden, and the excitement is mounting as Moira Brown is in for a very special surprise.
Hello.
I cannot believe they've left a label on for you.
How
are you?
Very well, very well.
Happy birthday.
90.
90.
Into my 91st year.
Right, but you don't let a day over 21.
You lie so beautifully. Keep on.
So you've been everywhere then? You were even in Kazakhstan?
The only place that I haven't been in the European thing is Azerbaijan.
Oh, so you hope we get Azerbaijan?
I'm hoping before I pop my clogs. It would be the, you know, one on my wish list.
Oh, okay.
But hey, you guys keep going. It's an absolute pleasure to meet you. You're an inspiration. Keep on, it's a pleasure to meet you and keep on inspiring the way you do.
Oh, thank you.
See that number, Moira?
90, yeah.
Yeah, you watched my spelling. I know you were a head teacher, so you watched my spelling. Legend. Right, I'm writing legend. And there, exclamation mark, and where am I signing? There, I'll sign in between here.
Yes, please.
There you go. So where's your favourite place that you've been for in Scotland? There must be a favourite.
The country I like best as a country is Slovenia.
Oh, Slovenia, I like Slovenia.
Because it reminds me of Scotland. It reminds me of the South End. I travelled widely with my husband with the sea, so been to Japan, been to China, been to India, Pakistan. I've been in Israel with them, Haifa before, with the game there. And I had 10 years in the Orkneys on a remote island, and I did a bit, I'm a qualified nurse.
Oh, okay.
So my RGN, and I filled in voluntary, but what would have got around the island, all the, do you not dare phone it and get any chat? There's a football game on the telly. And one had, I said, only in an emergency. And once somebody phoned me and I said, is this an emergency? No.
Put it down. And Moira, have you got any tips for John and the boys? No?
And just keep doing what you're doing and backing up, because when we went to Norway and had a wee holiday with a Norwegian friend before he arrived, I was impressed and said to my sidekick, hey, although they're pressuring them, they're all backing one another up.
Aye.
In defence. And after Holland scored, I said, we're going to be all right. Don't you worry, Ian.
Well, do you want me to let you know a secret, Moira, right? Do you know the reason? Do you know the reason why we scored the 2 goals? Because it was in the shade. It was roasting, remember? 2 goals we scored were in the shade, so that's why we scored.
Water around us, even, but I missed the good goal because I was so, a young guy in front of me kept hugging me, and then I got it on the screen and I missed the real good goal. But I saw it coming. There were things coming across a light wine play.
Now, as we know, Moira can talk for Scotland, but John has to go play for Scotland.
Right, so are you coming back for your 91st birthday? You're right, you coming back? That's an invite.
I'll be there as long as there's breath in my body.
Oh, aye, too right. Legend.
So, Moira, tell me a bit about your experience meeting John McGinn. What did you think of him?
What a cheerful, happy, relaxed body he is. And a gentle gentleman, but he seems to get fight that inspires him, where it comes from, but the feeling of Scotland. I've never seen him on the park that he wasn't willing to fight.
Well, we're going to let the boys get on with their training.
Right.
Now, I hope you've enjoyed our first festive editions of the show, featuring Scotland's hidden heroes and our favourite bits of Scotland Speaks. Now, we'll be back next week with our New Year show, featuring more of the very best moments of Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond. Meanwhile, from Alex, myself and the whole team at Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond, a good New Year when it comes.
This is an exciting time in Scotland's story, and understanding our past will help us determine our future. And when Scotland's voice is heard, it charts the way forward. This is Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond.